Welcome back, Venturers. It's time for another discussion about VNs. I am Emar, and together with Tauros, we bring back a monthly segment talking about VNs we've been reading last month. So, Tauros, did you recover from spooks of Halloween? How was your November?
Ooh, my November. I really needed it after those spooky scares from the Halloween season. But I'm happy to say we have new troubles terrorizing me in the visual novels I read, but for very different reasons. Why? Because last month I read the fan disc to Meteor World actor Badge and Dagger. It's a fan disc to Badge and Dagger, which I talked about at some point months ago when I read that. But the general gist of it is that this takes place in a city, a modern day fantasy. It's stylized very much as a detective story, as investigating, dark alleyways and calling up leads and all of that. But there are fantasy races involved, like elves and pixies. And as such, that means there are some magical elements involved in the story, but it's not a fantasy like you would typically expect of like the classical swords and magic kind in a medieval village. No, this is very much more as if, what if there was some magical elements in a modern day setting? Alongside electricity and the bureaucracy of government and concrete sidewalks. The main character is a detective named Daruka, and he is such a lazy, rude, dismissive jerkass of a main character. He's a detective in the police agency, and he's been sort of banished to the 13th Division, a small place where they send all the other rejects who are a little too dangerous to be fired. And so him and his little gang of misfits get into their various adventures while investigating cases and the dangers that suddenly aspire. This is the fan disc, Badge and Dagger. And I think a lot of people would know, even if you don't know anything about the original, is that the original Meteor World actor just had no real endings at all.
Huh?
Mm-hmm. It was multiple.
That's the first thing that...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind when you were describing it. So far, you summarized in exactly, or at least similar manner, that you spoke about the original. So...
I mean, yeah, I'm describing the original.
Is that continuation?
And of course, it's a fan disc, so it's building off that same world building, that same setting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, just in case there's anyone out there who doesn't remember what the original
obviously.
Meteor World actor is about, I'm describing it. And the original...
Yeah, so I'm thinking, how does it tie one to the other?
Yeah, let me say. So the original had multiple routes involving different romanceable heroines. All of them had... Well, not all of them. Most of them had terrible endings where nothing got resolved. The story just stopped. There was no ending. It wasn't even like an open ending. It wasn't even... There's no resolution. It's just you're reading and suddenly the credits are rolling. That was by far the worst part of it then. So, here we have what looks like a fan disc. That's what everyone would describe it. It's additional content, about 10 hours. We have a new heroine route. This takes place after the main events of Meteor World Actor. And so all of those heroine routes apparently are non-canon. This...
What?
Yes, this went off a continuation of the common route. So none of those heroine routes mattered. We don't get any bonus content in terms of those heroine routes in this fan disc. Usually that's what fan discs do, right? They'll have like a bunch of 2-hour short stories that continue that romance and you get those lovey-dovey scenes and all of that. Nope, that's not here. And as for bonus content, like I said, it follows the main plot line. More things happen. It made Fuyumi a romanceable heroine, and there's no real meat to that. There's very little, I guess you could say, romanceable content there once you start her branch. And there's kind of sort of some other stuff with another character, but whatever. And guess what happens in this VN2? Guess how it ends?
Surely they learned their lesson, and this time it will be a very nice, fulfilling, and closed ending. Surely.
Not even close. You know how it goes. You're just reading and suddenly credits. You're like, oh my god.
It's tradition at this point, okay? They had to uphold the tradition.
Yeah, it didn't even bother me this time because I knew it was gonna happen. After how the first one went, and knowing it had the same writer and dev team and all of that, I'm like, any minute now, I'm just gonna read and I'm just gonna get hit with the story continues next time. I know what's coming, and then it happened, and all I could do was laugh.
Yeah, but think about it. If they had a meaningful, well-paced, and closed ending, now you would be here complaining that it did not uphold tradition. See?
No, I wouldn't. I would love if it had an ending. Are you kidding me? I would love if there was any sort of ending, like a plot line got resolved, and then it's like, oh, but there's the greater threat looming in the background. It's like, okay, I would be fine if this was like the end of chapter 1 in the next, sequel. But it's not even. It just straight up was like, hey man, all this crazy stuff's about to go down. We got some cool premises here, huh? And it's like, sayonara.
Listen, in the next fan disc, surely they'll address everything.
Oh, shut up. I'm gonna get baited again into this. I told you, I'm a completionist. I like seeing a series the entire way through. I like starting from the first, even if it was decades ago. At this point, if they really do ever come out with a sequel, I'm probably gonna dupe myself into getting it.
Oh my god, so you have the same problem I do, because I already... Can I say... the completionist aspect, right? I already know, especially if series goes downfall, I'm like, yeah, but I kind of have to give them a chance. I'm kind of invested enough to continue on. And the one title that comes to my mind to that is probably one that I brought many times before. It's the Nekonin. It's the Ninja Catgirls one.
Oh yeah, that was a trilogy, and you read all of them, right?
Yeah, and I felt like the first few titles were really good, but at some point it just kept adding characters for bizarre reasons instead of developing the ones you already have. Why?
Well, I mean, that's different. To a certain degree, every moege kind of falls into that trap, right? You have to keep adding new characters. You have to add new romanceable heroines to keep people enticed into buying more. Because it's a moege. That's the whole appeal, is the cute girls and getting into romance, right?
Yeah, fair enough, but I'm not really referencing my problem with the genre as much as I already know, being, let's say, 5 titles deep in, that it's going downhill. But I'm invested enough that I'll probably read the sequel, okay? And you're the same with the Bitter World actor, like, yeah, the fan disc was like, but I already know. I've been 2 titles deep. There's no escape from me.
Oh, okay, well, that's fair. That's rough, dude. Because...
Yeah, I understand. I completely understand you, because I'm the same.
Because the thing is, this Meteor World Actor series is so good. They have a lot going for it. It's just, honestly, if they weren't completely messing up this ending, I would be rating these so much higher. Like, for one thing, I gotta praise it again, no matter how many times I have to. The writing, and I suppose the translation, is phenomenal. I told you that the main character is such a lazy, smart mouth jerk ass. And that's reflected in the writing throughout the whole VN. In his, inner thoughts, that's the way he talks, and his, snarky way of viewing the entire world. And the many, casual ways he cusses out his friends and enemies alike.
Yeah, but Taros, that's the worst, right? The fact that title has redeeming qualities makes it even harder to drop.
No, exactly. And I don't want to say that
Right.
it was terrible, because I did. Like, Meteor World Actor has some really high minute-to-minute enjoyment. And that's what I really like in visual novels and other video games and all sorts of other stuff, is not just how I felt at the end of it, but just minute to minute, asking myself, am I having fun with this? And some titles are better at it than others, and you have, like, Meteor World Actor, which is great. It's one of those titles that I could seriously just boot up a save anywhere. And pretty soon, if I'm not careful, I'll get suckered into just reading the whole thing right from then and there. I'll forget what I was meant to do and just start spending like an hour reading it.
I mean, I completely get you. There are some titles that exude exactly the same reaction from me. I mentioned Nekonin, but the second example that comes to mind is Eiyusenki. Eiyusenki was the world-conquering title that has similar premise to Fate in how they portray important historical figures as anime girls, and then you go around unifying the world. And that seemed cool, but some of the things they did with the story was so crap.
Mm-hmm. But you really like the writing of that.
Moments, and in the moment-to-moment gameplay, and our story was fine, but overarching narrative is just no bueno.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, a Meteor World Actor, this Badge and Dagger, it was more than fine. It was great. That was like quality you don't often see. Because, like, when you have a main character with as much personality as Ruka, you have to commit to it. You can't do it half-heartedly, otherwise he comes across as really shallow. You gotta have a main character and who reflects the entire perspective of the story, and that's something this fan disc nails. The original VN2. It's just, but like, they didn't even follow up on the main plot threads from the original main common route. They kind of did, but there's a few spoilery aspects that they just totally dropped. They're just like, we'll mention it again here in the fan disc and just put it on the back burner and never address it again. And it's like, I feel like that's just this VN in a nutshell, the whole thing. Great premises, and we kind of won't really follow through with it till the end. We'll just get distracted with this other shiny new premise we'll jump to instead.
Now, funny enough that you mentioned the protagonist being a low-effort detective, let's call it, like a kind of fuck-up on many angles, right? Because my closest example of that kind of protagonist in a newer setting of being a detective in a very weird place is probably Demon Bane. That was the title that had start from the perspective of protagonist that is just a regular detective in a Arkham stylized city.
It's very fun. It's one thing to see a typical main character who's usually I'm for justice, and I'm somewhat weak-willed. I just want to please everyone. That's the sort of bland self-insert main character you see in a lot of other titles, and it works.
Yep.
But on the other hand, it's very entertaining to see this guy constantly arguing with his supervisors. They're trying to chew him out for breaking the rules and breaking procedure, and he's all making a joke of it with all sorts of non-stop quips.
Okay, I see.
But on the other hand, he also knows when to be serious. He's not a one-dimensional character. And even though you said in your example about a fuck-up detective, he does have skills. He is incredibly skilled at some things. He has his ice powers too, which is incredibly useful when trying to fight criminals here in the Force. And so there are a lot of times we get to see his serious side, and to show that, if he really applied himself, if he had a different personality, he would probably be doing much better for himself in life. In his personal life and, in his career as well. But
Man,
That's just who he is.
As a cop, someone who acts somewhat as a cop with a freezing power that can say freeze and they stay in place.
Ha
Nice.
ha ha. What a
I
pun.
had to.
To be fair, that's also something that gives a lot of interest in this VN, is that there are criminals out there with these superpowers as well. And because they're so varied, and there's just pretty much anything you can think of, it leads to situations where they're investigating a crime scene, and you can never really rule anything out.
Oh, yeah.
On the one hand, you might say that, like, oh, if this was a typical normal human, then jumping up to the 4th story of a building would be impossible. They would need some sort of ladder, or someone who could lay down a rope line and they could climb it and pull it back up beside them. When you have, common sense, then there's only so many possibilities. But if you don't know who the criminal is, and you have to always consider what's like, well, what if there's a keeper who could fly? And it's like, well, yeah, that is true. That could also be true. We can never rule anything out then. Then it's totally possible that he might have jumped from the 1st floor to the 4th floor. And that's what...
The way you describe those cases reminded me when I spoke about 9-9. That was a title that had an overarching murder mystery in which superpowers were involved and exactly the same thing transpired. Every time they sat down and thought, okay, maybe this is the culprit and this is how they did it, someone suggested, what if there exists a superpower that contradicts that reasoning? And I started there thinking, is that better or worse for a mystery? Because on one hand, I myself can't really reason out the solution easily as long as there is a potential deus ex machina that leverages everything down. I don't know. It makes for an more intriguing story, and it's more mysterious.
Well,
but because it can give you more clues, by the same token, invalidating the reasoning you get from those.
I'm sure that's probably the case for 9-9 or whatever, but as far as Meteor World Actor and its Vandis goes, I'm not sure if I would really say they're murder mysteries. They are, literally, because there's been some sort of crime involved, including possibly a murder, and they have to try and figure out who did it. But on the other hand, the story isn't really focused on that. Even when they're trying to solve the case, it's much more about, I guess, going through the procedures, scoping out leads, trying to find, new possibilities, taking some interesting data they found over to a specialist who then gives them an interesting plot development. When you say murder mystery, there's always that air of intrigue around it, It's always the questioning aura behind, is this person the one who did it? Whereas Meteor World Actor is more like an action chase, where it's they're hunting down the tail, especially in some other ways the story goes when it starts focusing on other aspects, other big picture syndicate sort of stuff.
That's fair enough, but even in those kinds of stories, you have some sort of deduction and logical process. You have clues and or how can I say it? Strong evidence that leads you to believe something will happen either at a place or by a given person. And that's a very similar to how murder mystery talks about what happened in the past, and you reverse engineer who did it. Right. So in that vein, it's very similar. That's why I chose this as an example. Even though, okay, fair enough, there's a different atmosphere in a murder mystery, is something that happened already, probably won't happen again, but you still need to chase the culprit. Whereas what you say is something more action-based, that they are on the move, let's chase them, right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm not saying that anything you said was wrong or that, because yeah, you do have a point. It's not quite. It's similar, but I don't want to give the wrong impression, you know? It's one of those
Fair
weird
enough, fair enough.
situations. But yeah, I started Meteor World Actor with such high hopes, loving where the plot was going, enjoying the fantastic writing, and then got let down by just constant rug pulls and all of the route's endings. So here I am with the fan disc, and I can say I enjoyed it more because I knew those dumb rug pull endings were coming. And so I never let my hopes get up in the first place.
Wait, do you think those rug pulls and abrupt endings serve as a sequel baiting of sorts?
Yeah, of course it's a sequel bait. Where else are you gonna go with the story?
Okay, so
And if they
see you
actually
on the Meteor World Actor 2.
God, if there was a Meteor World Actor 2, then I would be a lot more acceptable of them. I would put a lot more faith into the developers and the writers. But instead, with this title, it feels so much more like, I don't really know where to go from this now, and I don't really wanna. So here's some different plot threads instead. It comes across so much more like that.
Surely they'll address everything in the sequel, okay?
Yeah, totally.
Surely.
And maybe pigs will fly too.
Yes, they will. It's a fantasy world, okay? Everything's possible.
Yeah, totally. Ugh. All right, I've talked enough about it.
Yeah.
I originally
Okay,
didn't want to talk about this at all because it's more the same. More the same.
Oh my god. We need to get to the ground. And what I read on November, I've continued reading Mashiroiro Symphony, Sana edition. And to just give a recap, the story is in a high school setting. A new semester starts, in which a previously all-girls school converts to co-education. And a different co-education school closes down. And this forces a merger between those two schools. Hijinks ensue when protagonist, along with his best friend, act as ambassadors of peace and virtue, trying to convince the girls that did not have to deal with the opposite gender that they are not scum. And specifically, Sana Edition is a fan disc to that title that elevates a singular character, Sana, from side character to fully dedicated main heroine of the title. I gotta say, probably still the most enjoyable moments in this route so far, because I haven't yet completed it. I think I'm very close to. Probably the most enjoyable part is seeing behind the scenes, I would say, behind the scene talks between what I would call tsundere alliance. So two characters that are tsunderes talk about the protagonist behind his back, and both of them don't want to admit their feelings, but they probe each other about it. And that's the most hilarious discussion every single time. I love it.
And I'm assuming
Absolutely
just from the
hilarious.
art style and from the premise that this is a slice of life comedy moege romance too.
Yep. And unlike the original Mashiroiro Symphony, which I finished one route that has been adapted to anime, okay? So I threaded the route that I've seen animated before. Now it's completely new territory. And unlike my previous experience with the Mio route, this one is completely new. I don't see any similarities from anime. And in some aspects, some character developments feels like a redemption. Well as in the Mio route, Sana lost, and that was very heartbreaking moment. Now here, she has a chance with the protagonist, and it's like, what will happen next?
Interesting.
Still, the bonding moment and the fact they incorporated club, because high school settings tends to have revolve around club. In this title, in Mashiroiro, they spend a lot of time talking about the club activities. In this case, animal rescue and nurture club. So what they do is they find injured animals, they nurture them back to health, and then release. And it has that somber aspect of showcasing attachment, because obviously during the course of nurturing those animals, they feel attached to them, but then comes the parting moment when they are healthy and they have to be released to wild, and they have to say goodbye. That's a very neat concept. In the original, it has been juxtaposed, having those animal nurturing and saying goodbyes with the romance plot of the protagonist with the club leader, and somehow having to let go, quite literally, of that. With the fact that they had cats they took care of, and they both resonated to the names of characters. So it was super weird seeing how sometimes the same name is used in the context of an animal and sometimes as a person.
That's cute in its own little way.
But
yeah,
but I just wanted to finish that thought by saying that it was intentional and it served a purpose in a title, because especially for Tsundere character, it gave her a way to express to a name her true feelings, and still had a plausible deniability approach. No, I wasn't talking to you, I was talking to the cat, right? That was very clever out of them.
So you mentioned you're close to the ending. Do you have faith in the ending that it'll pull through? Unlike the Badge and Dagger fan disc I read?
Sure. I pick titles that have good endings, Taurus.
How do you know that?
I mean, based on my previous experiences, it's fine. I'm confident, okay?
Okay.
Taurus, you seem cursed with the ending, so
Well, I mean, I had to have known it walking in.
Okay, fair enough. With the fundings, that's true. That's true.
But either way, so does this change your opinion of Sana much? Going from a fan disc totally revolving around her compared to the original?
Hilarious. You know what's actually hilarious? No. I like her in the original already. So it doesn't really change. I was on her side anyway.
Interesting. But it's not like, did you come across with any deeper understanding of the character, or is it just simply, it's nice to see content involving her now?
Now, this is interesting question, because you are basically asking whether or not there was enough new character development in the fan disc for me to grow deeper appreciation of a character, or maybe deeper understanding, right? And I feel like she has been done justice in the original. And there's a lot of development there that just carried over here, and it just clicks.
Oh, nice.
Now, there are some aspects they expanded upon, sure, but my overall impression didn't change.
Okay, so this is more like the capitalization on a very well-developed character who just didn't have a heroine route.
I agree. Yeah.
That's great.
Way to put it. Yeah.
Oh, that's a very nice way for the developers and the fans alike to view it and to appreciate it.
I feel like in order to make the route from the original, in which she did not win, meaningful, she had to be well developed by then. Now, Granted, probably not everybody likes Tsuneres and will take umbrage with some aspects of how such character approaches the protagonist and or not being honest. Fair enough. But to me, I felt like they did it really tactfully. She stayed true to her character. She sank down with the ship, so to say. And in this, she still has a chance. I was like, damn, that's well put together. I'm still waiting for the moment if in this route will the events transpire and will they find the abandoned kittens, which was the starting point of the entire romance route from the original. I did not reach that point. If that even is the case, maybe this fantasy doesn't go that way.
Mm-mm.
You know the butterfly effect. Something changed and the events do not transpire the same way, right?
Haha, classic.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah,
I guess
classic. So
this
I'm still not sure whether or not it will go that way or not.
Okay. And I guess the last question. You mentioned they had 2 pets and they gave them the same name, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Which of the 2 pets is cuter?
They had the same pet. Because the idea was there was a white cat and black cat. And each of them shared a name with a character in the club. Probably the black cat wins too, because that was the most important one, yeah. The one that Sana adopted. Yeah.
Yeah, nice black cat fan. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. On that vital piece of information, that will do it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is what we've been up to, and hopefully you learn a little bit more about the titles we've been reading. Maybe you're interested in them. Who knows? Let us know in the comments, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks all our listeners for listening in, and venture out.
Venture out.